Long ago, Queen Marika commanded Sir Mesmer to purge the Tower folk. A cleansing by fire. It's no wonder the Hornsent holds the Erdtree in contempt. That aside, man is by nature a creature of conquest. And in this regard, the Tower folk are no different. They were never saints. They just happened to be on the losing side of a war, but it's still a wretched shame.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madmen. I hope everybody's doing well. In today's edition of Elden Ring Lore Shadow of the Erdtree edition, we're going to be talking about the antique race of people known as the Hornsent, the horned folk of Ballarat Tower. These scorpion-eating fellows' hatred of the Erdtree and all things of its ilk is so intense that it lingers on their armor pieces. For example, the Cursed Blade mask and the Horned Warrior helmet, which causes its wearer to become nauseated with the blessing of the Erdtree, reducing the effect of crimson and cerulean flasks, but ultimately not by much. We're also going to go into how they're connected with the omen from the base game and the fell curse and even the fell god. So the Hornsent are the people of the Land of Shadows before it was the Land of Shadows. Their capital, for lack of a better term, seems to have been the Ballarat Tower settlement, and while this capital was the main place the Hornsent lived, they had other smaller settlements all across the map. So the average Hornsent person appears to be just like any other human, but with a crown of little thorns coming out of their head. Just regular little devil horns, not unlike the horns found on the formless mother uplifted Albinaurics. Although the Albinaurics have them on the top of their head, and the Hornsent seem to have them more around the outer circumference of their head. Now, there were some Hornsent that were born with these crowns of tangled mass of horns, essentially, which in many ways evoked their divines, or their divinity, which we can see hanging from the specimen hall. So when a Hornsent had these giant tangled horns, they were viewed as, a sign of the divines. But it also came with a divine responsibility as well. It was their destiny to become sculpted keepers, the highest of which, or the highest prestigious order of sculpted keepers, of course, was the lion dancers, those allowed to use the lion puppet. Aspiring ones can be seen as the horned warriors patrolling the Ballarat settlement. They were basically the underlings of the puppet keepers, if you will, and failed sculpted keepers were known as the Cursed Blades, and they were still revered. They weren't hated or seen as pariahs or anything like that. They often served as guardians for old crypts, and their dancing skills were, legendary. Look at these guys move. And obviously their martial dancing prowess wasn't good enough for them to become lion keepers, but that don't make them slouches. And they can still be found throughout the Shadow Realm to this day in old Hornsent ruins or the Tower of Ballarat or ancient Raoul ruins. They're quite uncommon nowadays, though. And it could be because, as revered and accepted as they were, the tide eventually turned against them. After which a good portion of them was imprisoned in jails, at least Liberth and Mira were. Others seem to have evaded this, or perhaps just weren't rounded up with the others. Until like yesterday, I thought that the Cursed Blades were also chopped up and put inside the jars, and that's why we couldn't find any more of them in the jails. Mainly because they share the same white hair with the main body and those fleshy mounds that reside in the jars. Sure, we don't see any horns in that mass, but it's entirely possible that they could have the horns excised before they're put with the rest of the meat. I also found the long white hair to be notable, as it's also found on other horned beings such as the omen or the ancestral followers. But that doesn't appear to be the case. I mean, maybe a couple of them got thrown into a jar. Regardless, these frozen jar production facilities were not the place you wanted to end up if you were anybody. So, sidebar, since we're talking about the jails again, let's go on what's called a tangent regarding yesterday's video. So I really wish I would have found the Shaman's village before recording that video I posted yesterday. I didn't realize how important the word shaman was going to be in this DLC, as my only encounter with it when I recorded that video was the Bonnie Village ghost and the Tooth Whip description. But after visiting Shaman Village, it's like, yeah, the Shaman are 100% the Newman. The minor Erdtree incantations description and the golden braid pretty much confirm that Marika grew up in the Shaman Village, which I would say more than proves that Newman equals Shaman, but I don't think the jar treatment was exclusive to the Shamans. They were definitely the main ingredient, but personally I think the Hornsent potentates of Bonnie Village began rounding up everybody from humans to blood fiends to shamans, even their own damn kind from the look at some of those ghosts at Ballarat Jail. Basically anybody they could get their hands on to make the jars and stick them in those gels so that they could become quote-unquote saints. using of course the shamans as a main ingredient of this fleshy gumbo given their divine properties, and to legitimize them as saints, they use the other bodies as filler meat. According to the description of the toothed whip, shaman's flesh was said to meld harmoniously with others, which I think more or less confirms this. It would also explain why the shaman host is able to assume direct control of this fleshy mass of innard meat, while also retaining some of its original form. I just like the idea that the Hornsent were this extremely brutal, alien-esque race that I think would be more than willing to put its own people into jars right alongside these foreign interlopers, aka the Newmen, in a way exploiting the divine properties of the Newmen so that they could quote-unquote manufacture saints. Anyway, though, moving on, there are a number of different types of Hornsent. So obviously there's the NPC Hornsent that we meet, and he appears to have been a potentate for Bonnie Village, which we just talked about the jars. What these guys did was they were in charge with chopping up the individuals who were to be put in the jars. And they're known for wearing this mask, which is made up of hardened, dried up caterpillars, held together by what appears to be a raggedy hood. And aside from Hornsent, the NPC, we can also see this mask worn obviously by the potentates, so it's safe to assume that's where he came from. And there's the average Hornsent person, which again is just like the average noble wandering around the lands between, except with a little circle of horns around his head. Yeah, they have access to different incantations. Their casters have this spiral that rises from the ground they can summon on you. The larger versions of these ghostly revered spirits carry large cleavers, not unlike the cleavers wielded by the misbegotten, so perhaps there's a connection there. Maybe misbegotten are a result of human and Hornsent intermingling, or maybe it's just like the curse of the omen, presumably brought about by the intense resentment and anger that the Hornsent as a people held for Marika and the Erd Tree. There's also a number of large Hornsent corpses with the divine crown of tangled horns sitting in a meditative-like pose across the Shadow Realm, easily familiar to all of us as the places where revered spirit ashes are recovered, the description of which refers to them as those who came before. Now, some of these corpses lack a head, perhaps they crumbled, or maybe, just maybe, some of these were Newmen and they've had their heads removed in a similar manner to all of the statues of Marika in the Lands of Shadow. And if so, maybe the heads were even removed to throw in jars. Anyway though, now there were certain revered members of the Hornsent race, like these cursed blades, known for wearing these golden ornate masks affixed with a tangled, gnarled crown of horns. These individuals set out to be sculpted keepers who were the wielders of the lion puppet, for example, but they failed, and instead chose to be temple guardians and ascetics all across the lands of the Hornsent, until a good amount of them were imprisoned in the jails. Presumably around the same time, the Hornsent locked away the Lamenter, essentially the face of their god that they were so ashamed of they buried deep below ground, and then presumably began to fear. I mean, the Lamenter was probably just some regular Hornsent guy who happened to find a stone mask with horns, the Lamenter's mask, and when he put it on, it turned him into one, which resulted in all of the other Hornsent being like, well, what the hell are you? And as we know, the Lamenter looks like an omen, for lack of a better term. Horns coming out of even the most uncomfortable places. And yeah, perhaps this horrified the Hornsent. Maybe even they started to become ashamed of their horns. Another one you're likely to encounter either at Bellarat Tower Settlement or the ancient ruins of Raoul would be the Horn Warriors. These guys do not know the word stagger. Yeah, they can be dropped to a knee if you hit them with a couple heavy attacks, but they don't ever stagger, for me at least. They're known as the keepers of the tower, and they wield these really cool curved swords, either paired or great, and they're highly proficient in the art of horn calling, which as seen here is pretty self-explanatory. The Horned Warriors are essentially the elite fighters of the Hornsent, and while their number is few nowadays, they're still extremely deadly combatants and would give any of Mesmer's knights a run for their money. And come on, what a great design they have. There's also a Hornsent Grandma. And yeah, she'll only converse with you if you're wearing that lion head, but she can become a prime source of scorpion soup, which is the traditional cultural dish of the Hornsent. Of course, now since the age of the Hornsent has long since passed, this soup has lost a bit of its potency and even its warmth, but it still packs a punch, much like the Hornsent NPC. Which reminds me, you can actually give the Hornsent NPC one of these soups and he'll say basically what I said, that it's just not the same. Which again, it makes sense. He's this extremely resentful Hornsent who feels the full weight of everything Mesmer did to his people. But as Needle Knight Leda says, they weren't saints, they were just on the losing side of the war. But I guess it makes you wonder why. Why did Marika have the Hornsent put to the sword? Well, I guess the simple answer was because they were turning all of her people into living jars, or again, at least a main ingredient for the living jars. And it could also explain why Marika brought the practice to the lands between. Maybe that's why there's all these broken up jars by the Erd trees, that the Numen in the jars are just trying to be reborn by the grace of the Erd tree. Could make sense. But yeah, at the end of the day, I can't think of another good reason Marika would put her most ruthless of children in charge of putting these Hornsent people to the spike. See, in my mind, it can't not be personal, but again, I've yet to read even close to all the descriptions in the game, and that's the fun thing about these first couple of videos. We'll be kind of just learning this shit together. The Hornsent NPCs that we encounter in the game all refer to Queen Marika as having betrayed them and put them to the torch, and while these sources are obviously biased and should be taken with at least a grain of salt, it still isn't clear if this persecution of the Numen people happened prior to Marika's supposed betrayal, or was the cause of this betrayal. Obviously, the Hornsent are going to tell the story in a way that paints them as the victims, but they really do seem to harp on that betrayal aspect of it. Obviously, that could just mean that when the Numen showed up, the Hornsent allowed them to integrate into their society, and Hornsent the NPC was a literal potentate from Bonnie Village, judging by his mask. So I'm not entirely sure we can trust him to tell us whether, he started stuffing Numen into jars before or after Marika betrayed them, but it's definitely something to ponder over. Anyway though, back to the Hornsent. Now the Hornsent grandma, she's a really cool character, really nice old lady. She gives us the spirit of her son in the form of an incantation that summons a ghostly skull that resembles a rancor. The spirit is capable of firing projectiles that also closely resemble wraiths from the base game, and is definitely an interesting spell for the faith-oriented. I'll give you guys the warning that my friend needed. You definitely want to go talk to her before you've beaten Mesmer, otherwise you won't be able to have any dialogue with her. And that being said, if you do defeat Mesmer and return to tell her, she's overjoyed at the fact and gives you a gourmet scorpion soup so you can actually see what these soups were like before the age of the Hornsent had passed. And it looks quite delicious and is described really delicious. And all that tells me is I'm going to have to do another Elden Ring food video. And so far, this is the only gourmet scorpion soup I've managed to find. It might be the only one in a playthrough. I don't know if you can give this one to the Hornsent NPC because he had invaded me right outside the Church of the Bud and got himself killed, which sort of confused me at first. I mean, Hornsent is this very interesting NPC. We already talked about him a little bit earlier on in the video, but Hornsent is essentially the vengeance and brutality of his people personified. And not only that, he's motivated by righteous justice, and his sole goal is to kill Mesmer, and after he accomplishes that, he plans to take the fight to Marika and the rest of her offspring. Maybe that's why he invaded me. I'd already beaten him to the punch. There weren't any demigods left by the time I did the DLC. But yeah, I believe the last time you're able to converse with him, that's what he says, that he's going to go after Marika and the other demigods, her offspring, and that if redemption by Mikola means he forgets this desire for vengeance and what happened to his people, then he does not want to be redeemed. There's a lot of cool lines in this DLC. I don't know if him invading me proves Leda right that he was going to be a betrayer, but I just couldn't bring myself to side with that paranoid fanatic. But at the end of the day, though, she's not wrong. I mean, all of us effectively weren't as loyal to the cause as she was, besides maybe Dryleaf Dane. I was there to kill Mikola, Theolier was there to find Saint Trina, Freya was there to unearth Radahn's connection to Mikola, Ansbach was effectively there to avenge his Lord Mog, so maybe her paranoia was founded. I just found every other character more interesting than her, so maybe there's a bias against her. Very cool armor set, though. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Back to the Hornsent as a people. The spiral pattern is a thing of major religious significance to the Hornsent, and they have several towers built in its image. The spiral itself is described as a normalized crucible current that one day will form a column that stretches to the gods, which definitely explains the spiral towers. The design is also used in Mesmer's coat of arms. It's found in between a flame and the Golden Order ring symbol. The spiral pattern itself resembles the pattern on the horns, the gnarled, tangled horns of the Hornsent's divinity. And those born with these tangled crown of horns protruding from their head were viewed as a sign of the divines. However, most of these babies perished in infancy. it's not really surprising when you've got horns coming out of quite possibly your eyes, ears, and brain. But we can find a number of these deceased Hornsent titans throughout the Specimen Hall in Mesmer's Shadow Keep. Even more curious are the enlarged versions of Torrent with elements of the ancestral beast. I think it's safe to say Torrent comes from the Land of Shadows originally, and if you take a look at his horns, they've also got that spiral ringed pattern to them. I mean, he's essentially a smaller version of this beast. Now, those born with the divine horns who were lucky enough to make it to adulthood were expected to begin the process of becoming sculpted keepers, which was obviously lengthy, and most of them washed out and became curse blades, as we talked about earlier. Some became horn warriors, others became bird warriors, which is a very interesting rare knight you can find throughout the DLC. But the goal was to become a lion dancer, and the lion dance was originally just a thing of beauty and grace. But once the wars of the Lands of Shadow began to erupt, the enthralling dance of the lion took on a more martial role within the Hornsent society. Can't really say how good that worked out for them, seeing as how Mesmer just casually pieces up one of their lion dancers in that DLC commercial, but they had to try something. And obviously the divine beast puppet clearly resembles the chain lions we see in the base game, or should I say the chain lions resemble the lion puppet. And those divine bird warriors I mentioned earlier serve a similar purpose to the lion puppets. It's essentially another discipline in the same societal religion that all of the Hornsent are a part of. Now, as for all the divine corpses we can find throughout Mesmer's specimen storeroom, I'm more than certain he's responsible for a good amount of them, but possibly not all of them. We know some of the bigger horned corpses must just be some high-ranked, extremely large sculpted keepers. Perhaps it's some of the same ones he killed in the commercial. It seems less like a study hall and more of a trophy room, but I can't say that it doesn't have at least some scientific or occult knowledge, as the secret rite scroll is found there. Now, there's also some evidence that possibly the Hornsent might have prosecuted non-horned individuals. We already talked about how they probably took a bunch of the shamans, who we now know as the Newmans, and sliced them up and created the living jars out of them. There was also a tribe that was long subjugated, presumably by the Hornsent, and in the ravages of war, this tribe, this destitute tribe, discovered a twisted deity known as the Formless Mother, or the Mother of Truth, or the Mother of Wounds, the Blood Star, if you will. And just like that, the tribe was turned into the Blood Fiends, who we see all over the Shadow Realm, the Mini-Mogs, as I like to call them. And for the most part, they seem to just mind their own business and practice their little blood rituals. That being said, they seem to hold no love for Mesmer's forces, regardless of what they've done with the Hornsent, as you can often find Blood Fiends fighting against Mesmer's army. Now, this could just be because Mesmer's army was ordered to eradicate everything that wasn't of the Golden Order or the Erd Tree, and unfortunately the Blood Fiends do fall under that category, so this long subjugated tribe is still subjugated, just by different tormentors. At least they've got the Mother of Truth backing them up. The Hornsent's apparent treatment of all other races who didn't have horns is as likely an explanation as any as to why those with horns are generally viewed as cursed omens in the Lands Between by any and all outside of the Dung Eater. And I've talked at length in previous videos at how bad the omens got it. I mean, even the lions with omen horns are enslaved and have fucking blades nailed to their arms, presumably forced to fight in gladiator arenas or serve as guard dogs of forts. I'm actually kind of surprised Marika allowed Godfrey and Radahn to use so much lion imagery. But then again, Godfrey was of the Crucible and Radahn was a Godfrey fanboy. Marika presumably met them in the middle and just said, lions are okay, but no horns. And look, a lot of good that did her. She wound up with 2 omen children. And this omen curse plaguing the Lands Between, and Queen Marika herself in particular, is probably a result of the intense animosity that a destroyed people is capable of being manifested in her supposed perfect Golden Order, which we already know to be fundamentally flawed from the base game. And these apparent flaws in her own order made it both possible and easy for Outer Gods to meddle with the Lands Between, particularly the Outer Gods who previously held power and influence in the realm now known as the Lands of Shadows. Perhaps that's what Outer Gods was in reference to, because they were outside the Lands Between. Or conversely, maybe the Omen Curse is a outcome of the jar experimentation, One interesting thing of note is that the omen dream of elder spirits, horned beings that torment them in their sleep, and the elders are probably some type of Hornsent. Perhaps the omen are plagued with memories of previous lives, or again it could just be that intense hatred and animosity manifesting itself in the lands between. Now this nature of having nightmares and horns at the same time isn't exclusive to the omen. The Hornsent themselves are also haunted by very particular imagery, in this case the furnace visages and the faces of fire giants. Now this could be because the flame that was used to burn the majority of the Hornsent was in fact the flame of the Fell God, now being used by Mesmer the Impaler. And this Fell God is of course the very same god who Marika sealed away inside the last of the fire giants. It was the flame of this very Fell God that Mesmer and his sister Melina bore a vision of at their birth. Mesmer himself had access to this flame, and it's for that exact reason that Marika sealed him away in the Land of Shadow to wage an unending crusade against the Hornsent. She sort of killed two birds with one stone. She managed to basically put her eternal enemies to the eternal sword, using her corrupted son who was born with the power of another one of her enemies, and sealed them all away in this shadow realm so they can kill each other for all eternity. It's honestly pretty genius on Marika's part. So when you boil this down to the stewed meat of it all, the Hornsent really aren't too different from the people of the Erd Tree. They're prideful, arrogant, consumed by an air of superiority of all other things, and just as brutal with equally strange tastes in food. You know, for example, Lands Between eats everything pickled, and the Hornsent eat scorpions. Both societies had their own unique customs and traditions, but they also shared some as well, as the Hornsent even had Empyreans. You know, that old soup-cooking granny I mentioned earlier, over in Ballarat Tower? Well, she's described as an Empyrean grandma. But much like the soup she gives us, she's lived far too long past her time, perhaps out of pure spite and hatred towards Marika. As I think I mentioned earlier, she is still capable of one last gourmet soup before taking the long nap. But anyway, both sides of this ancient conflict really aren't that different. They both subjugate other beings. Only thing's different really is that the Hornsent lost, as Leda so eloquently put it in the commercial. That's why I think in many ways the Hornsent NPC we meet in the game is meant to be a parallel of the young Marika who'd lost a chunk of her people, who was filled with vengeance and hatred for the Hornsent people. You know, probably because the Newmen were said to be so rare and, you know, they're few and far between. And she lost them to the brutality of the Hornsent, much like the Hornsent NPC lost all of his people to the brutality of Marika's worst child. So I think if anything this will be part 1 of my Hornsent videos, because I still need to read a bunch more descriptions and I've probably still got things wrong, but that's the nature of things. This DLC is just barely getting cracked open. But yeah, part 2 will be coming soon. I really want to get this Mog video out of the way, and I know there's a certain Dark Souls 2 video I've been teasing for almost a year now that I'm just looking for the right time to finish up and drop is all. But yeah, this will be part 1 of the Hornsent video, and next up will be probably how we misunderstood Mog, and then once I finish enir-ilim, you know, scouring it for all of its various descriptions and whatnot, then I will make the Hornsent video part 2. Anyways, though, I hope you guys found this video to be at least somewhat informative or amusing or entertaining. And if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about various things, but probably for the next couple weeks, specifically Shadow of the Erd Tree related things, then please consider subscribing. We just cracked 26K. Big deal for me. If you want to follow me somewhere else, I'm on Honored Madman on IG. That's really, I think, the only social media I have. And I was thinking of, you know, I hate saying this kind of stuff because it's like e-beggar territory. I was thinking of setting up channel memberships. Maybe I'll have like more off the cuff. Maybe I'll figure out how streaming works and I'll do more off the cuff videos about, you know, movies and TV or more obscure lore topics, or maybe lore topics that I feel have been talked about to death by other people but not by me, like ideas I hadn't planned to make videos of, but I could still, you know, I still have a lot to say about. So I might do something like that, you know, channel memberships, stuff like that. But anyway, you know, the messed up part about me not having discovered the Shaman village until like yesterday was that I had the gesture needed to get into it. I also had that grace in the back of the Shadow Keep. I basically had all the keys, just no knowledge on how to use them. And I know it's got that message right there, I just wasn't sure what it wanted me to do. I'd probably also forgotten I'd picked up that gesture as well. But that's really the best part about this exploring this DLC now that I have a YouTube channel, is that we get to unravel these layers of an onion together. By which I mean you guys helped me out a lot, because I saw all those comments on the Shaman village and I was like, why haven't I discovered this yet? I've been through a good chunk of the DLC, and like I said, I had all the keys but not the knowledge and how to use them. So I gotta thank you guys for that one. Plus it resulted in me making a cool little video like this, one that's as chock full of lore as I can manage. I think most of it I was pretty spot on. Again, let me know in the comments if I got anything wrong. I always like that. You guys are the main reason I found the Shaman village, you know, which is such a lore important place. But yeah, the next video is going to be on Mog and Ansbach and just the forces of Mog in general and how I misunderstood them. And I said earlier there's going to be another Hornsent video. There's going to be a lot of DLC topics. I was thinking of doing another video on just all the demigods, since we have pretty much all the lore we're ever going to get about this pantheon of demigods. But yeah, all in good times. I'm going to try and keep up a more frequent upload schedule if I can, just because I'm downright, giddy to talk about all this stuff, you know? But anyway, I hope everybody stays safe, and I will be seeing you next time, which should be very soon. Anyway, see ya. Have a good one.
Unquenched remains my thirst for revenge. The death of Mesmer was merely the start. Now comes the Piper to collect from Marika, her offspring, and all the Erdtree's denizens. In vengeance for the flames, my blade I wield. If Miquella's redemption soothes the ache that throbs within, demanding blessed vengeance, then I wish not to be by him redeemed.